Many pilots consider the instrument rating the most important rating you can earn. But just having it doesn't mean you're ready to fly hard IFR. Mother Nature can play tricks on you, especially if you're in an area where the weather patterns are significantly different from your home field. A trip from Atlanta to northern Ohio was an eye-opener for one pilot when he lowered his flaps for descent and suddenly found himself 80 degrees nose down. How did it happen? We'll find out on this episode of The Reider Report. Hello everyone, I'm Rob Reider, and welcome to episode 16 of AvBrief's Reider Report podcast, brought to you by Avemco Insurance. On today's program, my guest, then a newly minted instrument pilot, had a significant scare when he found himself in deteriorating conditions and unexpected icing that caused a temporary loss of control when he began his descent to his destination. He regained control of the plane and landed safely, but he learned some very valuable lessons about weather flying and lots more. Doug Armstrong will give us a full report right after this message from Avemco. According to Avemco claims data, 34% of accidents happen on landing. Does this number surprise you? Avemco Insurance Company values safety and believes strongly in continuous pilot training and education to help prevent these accidents and promote safer skies for everyone. That's why they sponsor the Fast Team Wings program and the Reider Report podcast. Avemco rewards safer pilots with premium credits through their Safety Rewards program. Earn an automatic 5% off by mentioning you're a Reider Report listener. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/Reider Report today. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, the Reider Report. My guest today is Doug Armstrong, who is flying a Piper Saratoga from Atlanta to Ohio and fell victim to the unpredictability of Midwest winters. And he learned some very important lessons that still, well, if I understand him correctly, humble him today. Doug, welcome to the Reider Report.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here.
I know that you're flying Citation Mustangs today, and I want to find out a little bit about what you do in those. But when your incident happened, you were flying a Saratoga and also flying a Seneca. But how did aviation get into your blood? Tell me about the path you took to get there and where you are now.
Well, I think like a lot of folks, it happened at a very young age. I always loved airplanes. And then I found out that my dad had gotten like 15 hours of flight lessons in when he was going to Princeton, but never got his pilot's license. For whatever reason, I grew up around a number of aviators, and I took flying lessons, but I never got my ticket. And by the time I got my mid-20s, I was going to Georgia Tech. I'm sitting in the right seat as an unlicensed pilot flying airplanes with friends. I really should become a pilot. So I just made the commitment. I flew 250 hours in 1 year, and I got my commercial multi-instrument rating all in one year.
Wow, that's a lot of focus. Did you have a job at the same time?
I did.
Wow.
I did. I was running a company in Atlanta, and remember flying with this guy, Kelly Tucker. He's a pilot for Delta now. And we would go out and do these instruments round robins, and we would fly around, lift out a PDK, and we'd land at 4 or 5 airports, and then we'd fly the park and brake and do a little shuffle around the airplane where one of us would run around the other side, one of us would jump seats, and we'd fly back, and the controllers would be asking us, "Don't you guys have anything better to do on a Friday night than do this every week?"
The Atlanta controllers are so great. I love those guys and
they're
ladies.
Fantastic. Yes,
Yeah,
they're great.
Oh, how fun is that? So they got to, I'm assuming they recognized your voice then, didn't they?
Oh yeah, we would fly, Friday and Saturday night, whenever we could. We would go out, do these instrument practice rides at night. Sometimes it would be really late. If it was really, really late, like after midnight, we would sometimes take our little Piper Warrior and go down to Atlanta Hartsfield and shoot approaches down there. And that was back in the day, when you could do that sort of thing. And I mean, this was back in the '80s or early '90s, and you would they late enough at night, they'd have one controller, and the guy'd be like, "Yeah, sure, you're cleared for whatever approach you want on whatever runway. Call me when you're done."
Did they allow you a touchdown, or did you just do low approaches and go missed?
He was, at 2 a.m, they really didn't care. They were like, "You can just have this runway over here and just keep doing approaches as much as you want."
Oh,
And that was always kind of fun.
that's fantastic. Well,
Doesn't work that today, I'm sure, but it was back in the day. You could do that.
did you become a professional pilot, or did you continue to run your business down in Atlanta?
No, I think I never became a professional pilot, but I did fly for work, which, I think is one of those things that history has shown is a pretty dangerous thing to do.
Hmm.
Because if your mind is on the meeting that you're going to do, or you're flying at the end of the day where you're tired, let's put it this way. I have a lot more respect for the issues associated with that today than I did back then.
Interesting. Is that because you're just older and wiser and or have lived through a bunch of stuff that has tested you in those areas?
Well, because of the work I do for the Coast Guard, we're required to go through annual crew resource management, risk management training, and then also some segments that the Coast Guard produces every year based on how the fleet is doing. And so I learned a lot about duty days and a lot of military studies about how sleep deprivation and distraction, can make you function like you're drinking alcohol if you've become fatigued enough. And through that, I started to measure performance in a way that I had not looked at it previously, and that got me to thinking a lot about what in the Coast Guard they talk about being in the flight box. You really need to be in the flight box when you're going to go flying. And that starts for, a half hour before you get to the airport for sure. Maybe it starts even the day before, where you're focused on flying. You're not thinking about other things. And if you're flying for work, that can be challenging, especially at the end of the day when you're already tired. You've already been working on, whatever the work related meeting problem was. And now you're going to fly home, typically at night or in the afternoon when there's thunderstorms. So the challenges, the risk factors associated with that are significantly higher than those of a normal flight that you might do as a professional pilot or for recreation.
That brings me to ask the question about how you got involved with the Coast Guard and fly citations for them as a member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary.
Well, I think in the mid 2000s, I was thinking, what could I do different than what I'm doing now, besides flying for work and flying my family? And somebody said to me, you could fly for the military. And I was like, how are you going to do that as a civilian? And so they said, but you could fly for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty interesting. And at the time they were, talking about, some of the options that they had. But later, I've had the ability to go out, find drugs and illegal operations on the water and fly search and rescue missions and find people who were lost at sea. And it's been a really fantastic adventure to be able to go and do that. But I think the most important thing that I get out of that is, if you are flying as a private pilot, they always tell you fly with a CFI. Well, a CFI is somebody that typically spent 1,500 hours in the pattern working with students. If you go to an airline or you go to NetJets or something like that, you've got a structure that teaches you, about the formality of flying. If you're, and I was in that gray zone where I was flying missions that CFIs really couldn't help me with because they were complicated missions and complex aircraft, weather, and a lot of stuff that I didn't have experience with, and neither did they. And the Coast Guard really taught me to be much more professional. an operator. We spend a lot of time talking about crew resource management and risk management. And it created that structure that I think is missing for a lot of people who are flying high performance airplanes without the benefit of that. And of course, if you're getting your recurrent training done at Flight Safety or with another reputable organization, that brings a lot of structure into it.
Boy, it sure does.
I fly the airplane today the way that the Coast Guard wants it flown, a military, which is something that I learned later in life and would have helped me a lot earlier in life.
I certainly resonate with that comment about that military training because, with respect to the Coast Guard and the HH-65 Dolphin helicopter that they fly, you could have a flight mechanic from New Orleans, a rescue swimmer from Cape Cod, a pilot from San Diego, and a co-pilot from Houston, having never met one another before, can get into that helicopter and perform like they've worked together for years. And kudos to you for your service to the Coast Guard Auxiliary and the use of your citation for those missions. Now, let's go back nearly 30 years on the flight in question of your Reider report, which was going to be from Peachtree to Cab to your flight up in Ohio in the Saratoga instead of the Seneca. Set us up for what happened and where you were going to go to and how you got yourself into the pickle of being VFR on top when you didn't really know what was going on down below.
Well, I think you have to start back a few weeks earlier when a business associate, actually was a customer of ours we were doing contract for, was like, hey, we've got this big opportunity. We'd like you to go talk to this medical manufacturer in Ohio. And of course, being a young, freshly minted instrument rating and not a lot of experience, I was like, sure, this would be great. And of course, there's winter in Atlanta, but winter in Atlanta is not like winter in Ohio, which I was about to learn.
And it sure is not, especially if you're north of the 40th parallel.
Yes. So, and that's a statement about another discussion about the importance of having local knowledge. Whether you're on the water or whether you're in the air, having local knowledge is very important. So initially we wanted to take this Seneca, which I'm not sure this would have been a happier story with the Seneca or not. And of course, we started out with 3 people and then that went to 5 people. So, I mean, this is another example of how these things tend to balloon on you. And I don't remember why we couldn't get the Seneca at the last minute, but we ended up with Saratoga. And I decided, hey, the weather isn't great. Maybe I'll take this CFI with me. And that was probably a good call. And anyway, we headed out on our way and we ended up in VFR conditions on top, about a 3,000 foot layer.
What time of day?
This was probably around 10 or 11 in the morning. And of course, I was thinking to myself, man, it's really cold outside and, it's not that cold on the ground. And, completely oblivious to, I'm thinking, all right, I'm just going to descend right through this and we're going to land. It's going to be great. And of course, it didn't go that way. So we get up to our destination and we're talking to center and they descend us down pretty soon before you know it. Of course, I don't want to interrupt the story too much, but you should have been asking, hey, I want to stay on top longer, all these things that, we didn't know. And I should mention that I had the very first Garmin GPS, which was kind of a lifesaver in this. It didn't have a moving map or anything on it, but it did have sort of a little localizer indicator.
Was this one of the small portables that you Velcroed onto your yoke?
It was. And of course, everybody was saying, you can't trust that thing. It's a GPS, it's whatever. And I'll tell you how it ended up saving our lives too.
I do want to ask, where in Ohio were you headed? Do you remember?
Somewhere outside of Cleveland. I don't remember the little airport, but it was a small airport. It had about a 4,500 foot runway, and it was very close to this company. So that's why we picked it. And
also very close to Lake Erie. So the lake effect was in full play on this, I bet.
Yeah. And, of course I had no clue about any of this. We were just going up there and the weather at the airport wasn't great. I mean, it was like maybe, I don't know, 600 overcast, 3 miles visibility with light drizzle. And it was like, yeah, okay, yeah, we can do this. Sure, no problem. So maybe this wouldn't have been a story except for the fact that we get in the soup, we get handed over to approach, and about our second radio transmission with approach, silence. The next thing I hear, everybody is on the radio trying to raise the approach controller. So now we're flying along, we're on a vector, just slogging through, watching the ice build up, and we're getting nowhere. There's no approach controller. So
This ice was a complete surprise to you guys. Did you notice the airplane's performance degrading at all?
a little bit. And so, at this point I was getting concerned because I used to read those aviation safety publications, and man, they were great. A buddy of mine had a whole library of them, and I would read them religiously, including all the back issues. So I knew that this wasn't a good place to be in icing in this airplane. So,
But you were solid at that point, solid IMC.
solid IMC with ice slowly accreting on the wings. So we get a hold of the center, and they're like, yeah, the approach control is down. So once again, we're suddenly dealing with a situation that's very complicated. So they climb us back up on top, and now it's somewhat questionable because the center controller is telling us, okay, well, we're going to try to vector you for this approach, but the radar isn't super great there. And of course, now the airplane is got a bunch of ice on it. We're back in the cold. The ice isn't going anywhere. But there's no options because, this layer extends for miles in every direction. And we don't have enough fuel to divert 200 miles to get back to where the weather's good. And of course, I'm still thinking to myself, all right, well, I'm just going to keep the power up. I got a big 300 horsepower engine. I'll drag this thing in. We get on the ground before the ice really gets to be a problem. And of course, I'm only able to see the wings.
But you have no idea about the buildup on the tail, which being a smaller airfoil and accumulating the same amount of ice is going to have a greater effect on it. So that's going to be in play in what happens next.
We get back to vectored around in the soup, and we're getting just joining the localizer pretty far out because, this center controller is super busy. And I was just applying the flaps. So the airplane goes literally 80 degrees nose down as we do this. I don't know how to describe it, but when Sully talked about that moment, between after the birds hit, it took him a minute to internalize what was going on. Well, the first thing that I noticed is the yoke wasn't in my hand anymore.
What?
Yeah. I mean, you're just flying along and your hands are where the yoke is, but the yoke isn't in your hands anymore because during the stall, the stabilator goes perpendicular to the wind as the airplane noses over, and it just yanks the yoke right out of your hand.
I cannot imagine that happening, and I certainly can't imagine being in that kind of a nose-down attitude, unintentionally anyway. You obviously recovered, but how much altitude did you lose?
About 1,000 feet.
Wow.
When it happens, the first thing that happens is it takes your brain like 2 seconds to go, what is actually happening here? And the airplane is not picking up speed, and so we leveled it out, brought the flaps back up, and we're like, wow, this is a serious, serious problem.
And you had 4 passengers on board in addition to the pilot in the right seat.
Yes, and those 4 passengers were pinned up against the ceiling of this Saratoga. They were wearing their seatbelts, but I mean, everything, the bags, everything went up against the ceiling is what I remember. Because, of course, your first reaction is not that I need to recover the airplane. Your first reaction is that I must be perceiving this incorrectly. Like, why is the attitude indicator look that way? Why are people all looking that way in the back? Anyway, I remember from aviation safety that they had said, don't use any flaps. So we got the airplane recovered. We climbed back up to the altitude. The controller wanted to know what happened. I wasn't really sure what happened.
And you climbed back into VMC on top again?
No, we just climbed back up to our assigned altitude.
Oh, boy.
Because I was like, we need to get this thing on the ground like yesterday. And I remember in the article, they said, when you put your gear down, you can expect it to happen again, which it did. But I remember from the article, they said, just leave your gear down and apply full power and recover. Now we had the airplane operating at full power, you had the gear down, and the runway had some snow on it. It wasn't the best braking. The VOR, we were flying a VOR approach because that was the only approach to this airport.
Whenever this was in the mid-90s, there probably weren't more than a handful of GPS/RNAV approaches in the country.
Right. And we didn't have a ILS. So I remember the VOR said, go left. And the flight instructor was like, the airport is to the left. And we were probably on a 3-mile final with no hope of seeing the airport. So now the weather had deteriorated down to about 301. GPS said, go right. And I said, I'm going with the GPS. I don't care what the VOR says, because, it's one of those windshield VORs and windshield wiper VOR things. It's going back and forth. And, there's ice all over the antennas, but the GPS nailed it. And, I remember in the article, they said, whatever you do, don't pull the power back, because you've got the prop wash over the wings that is giving you lift and it's going over the tail. So whatever you do, don't pull the power back. Anyway, we got down to the runway and we were fast. We were hot. And I remember that airplane slid all the way down the runway, but I wasn't going to pull the power off until we were in ground effect. Of course, as soon as I did, it just plunked onto the runway. And we used every bit of that 4,000 feet. I mean, we probably stopped about 50 feet from the end of the runway. We were very, very close to not making it.
Doug, I'd like to take a break now. And when we come back, I have a couple of more questions to ask you. And then we'll get to the lessons that you learned. We'll be right back. Avemco Insurance Company has been passionate about aviation safety for over 60 years. That's why they sponsor the Fast Team Wings program and support the Reider Report podcast. Avemco even rewards safe pilots with reduced premiums of up to 10%. You can instantly save 5% just for being a Reider Report listener. Call 800-353-9089 or visit avemco.com/Reider Report and tell them the Reider Report sent you. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, back to the Reider Report. We're back with Doug Armstrong, who found himself in a very unusual attitude, corrected that situation, but still was left with a scenario that was indeed, at the time, I would assume you would call it life-threatening, would you not?
I remember having the distinct feeling that somebody needs to do something about this, because we may not survive it. And then the realization that somebody is you. That's relevant command authority. The controller can't help you. No one else can help you but you. And that's a feeling that stuck with me for the rest of my flying career, and how important it is to be sure you don't get yourself in a situation that you can't get yourself out of.
Well, let's talk then about some of your takeaways on this, because you indicated to me that there were some significant things that you've learned, and obviously have just told me that have affected you to this very, very day. What did you learn?
I think the first one that I use today is, the more pressure there is to do a flight, the more you should push back on doing the flight. I've had other business flights where the weather was super bad, and, I had partners or whoever, employees were like, we need to get home. I'm like, let's go get dinner first. And then we'd order a round of beer, and I'd be like, see, now I can't fly anymore because I've had a beer. And, that just settles it right there.
That was your way of saying we are going to hold off and be smart, not stupid. Good idea.
The other thing I've kind of adopted is that flying should be fun. Unless you're getting paid, flying should be fun. And when you get in these situations where you're having to go to plan C or plan D, flying is not fun. And we need to completely avoid wherever possible. I don't want to have to demonstrate my amazing flying skills.
Unless you have to. All right, keep going.
Another one that you mentioned is, having a plan D. On another time when I owned a Cessna 340, I was flying up in the Northwest. This time I was a lot smarter, or Northeast, or area, what do you call that? And, we'd done a couple of approaches into Palwaukie and we couldn't get in there. And then the controller said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want an instrument approach into O'Hare." And he said, "Well, I don't know if I can do that." And I said, "Well, I'll declare an emergency if it makes it any easier for you." But, we'd done a couple of approaches. It was late at night. We still had plenty of fuel, but my plan D is always to go to the largest airport with the biggest lights and the best rescue system and the longest runways and land there. You read these stories about people that go to 5 different little airports in the middle of nowhere and don't get in, and then they run out of gas.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to declare an emergency in those kind of situations and get everybody working on your behalf. I didn't have to in that case. The controller was like, "Sure, we'll get you in there." And, you go into a big airport, well, you can see those those approach lights through 400 feet of fog. And that's a good way to get in somewhere. So a lot of people are afraid to do that.
You had gone missed at Palwaukie twice?
We had done 2 times, and the 2 aircraft that one in front of us and one behind us, they had all missed twice too. So I was like, well, we're not doing this anymore. I don't know where they're going, but I'm going to the biggest airport I can find. And I think if I'd been in that icing situation, I would have climbed back up on top and, had a whole different plan. And of course, the time to have that plan is before you take off, which we didn't have. So nowadays, one of the lessons I learned is I have a plan A, B, but I also have that plan D that 1000% is going to work every single time. And I've only ever had to use it maybe once in my career, but I always have it.
Is that plan D no-go?
Well, that plan D is, if I'm going to make a no-go decision, I no-go. But if I'm going, I always want to have a solution to this problem that I know will work, a divert that I know will work, to either go to VFR or go to a giant airport. We do a lot of flying in the mountains on the East Coast here. And I always have an airport that's in the lowlands that I know, hey, I can get into that airport and there's going to be people there that if something bad happens, we're going to have folks there who are looking out for us, which I think is very, very important. Any flight that you have a plan that you absolutely know for sure is going to work, or you don't go.
Nowadays, since if you're flying, say, a 340, or if you are flying the Citation for the Coast Guard, I'm assuming that these airplanes are totally well equipped, and you still probably are carrying some sort of a portable ADS-B receiver, a Stratus or a Sentry or whatever, and an iPad with Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight or whatever on it. So you have backup to backup to backup equipment-wise as well, right?
Absolutely. And, I think that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen in my career flying is the ability to get, for example, real-time weather in the airplane. Back in the day when we used to take an airplane that went 170 knots or something and fly at 600 miles, I mean, maybe you got the briefing an hour before you left, but by the time you got where you're going, the weather was 4 hours old. I mean, that was like playing Russian roulette. Nowadays, I fly the Citation Mustang, we get up and cruise and we look at the weather and we're like, hey, 5 degrees right now will take us over this other state and we'll never see the weather.
Even ADS-B weather can be deceiving if you're not paying attention to the indication on, if you've got a glass cockpit on the weather thing, say it's a G1000 or a G3X Touch, or on your iPad or tablet or whatever you have, that will indicate the number of minutes a particular radar depiction is old, and give you, sometimes it can get around 7-8 minutes, and that in a light twin or a single piston engine aircraft, that's flirting with possible disaster if you're trying to pick your way through weather.
Absolutely. And my good friend Jim Cook used to say that XM weather keeps the paint on the wings and onboard radar keeps the wings on the airplane. So,
Yeah, I gotcha. Anything else you learned, Doug?
I think the last thing is that it's very important to think about the ramifications of bad decision-making on your passenger. A lot of time there's pressure to go, but if things don't go well, that's a lot of responsibility. And, when things don't don't end in a happy way and someone gets hurt or someone never flies again or whatever because of experience. That's something you have to carry with you for a while. And I only mention that because that's something else that hopefully folks will think about when they get overcommitted or end up in a situation that maybe they should have taken different action.
Which leads me to go back to the question I referred to before we took the break. When you landed and got folks out of the airplane, number one, how did they regard how you handled the flight? Were they totally frightened? Or tell me about them and tell me about your instructor, and then tell me about how you responded over the next few hours.
Well, one guy immediately booked a commercial ticket home.
So he got a cab, went to either Akron or to Cleveland Hopkins and got a flight back to Atlanta. All right.
He did. We did our meeting. And I think a number of folks didn't really understand what had happened. It was sort of like really bad turbulence.
Oh.
And they didn't understand the implication of the pacing or whatever. By the end of the day, when we completed everything, we're headed home about 5. It was just rain. It wasn't a serious issue anymore.
And you were going to weather that was significantly warmer and
much warmer, much better.
And PDK even in those days, had great instrument approaches.
So the flight home was uneventful other than, if you fly for 3 hours with rain pelting on the windshield, that does something to you also.
Yes, it does.
And the 3 guys and the flight instructor flew home with us. I don't think they really ever understood the danger that we were in.
Well, if they listen to this episode, they'll find out, won't they? Doug Armstrong, thank you so much for being on the Reider Report.
It's been a pleasure. I've got a chance to do this.
Doug continues to fly his Cessna Citation Mustang for the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and I thank him for his civilian service to that small but mighty branch of our military. The Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. And I'm always grateful to hear your stories and to include them in our podcast. Keep them coming. Here's my email address, rob@avbrief.com. rob@avbrief.com. We drop episodes every couple of weeks, so you can do some hangar flying anytime, anywhere. There's always something to learn, no matter how many or few hours you've got in your logbook. The Reider Report theme and commercial instrumental music for the podcast was written and performed by Rob Pottorff. For Avemco Aviation Insurance and avbrief.com, I'm Rob Reider. Catch you next time on The Reider Report.